Welcome to the last lecture in the series, Vestals, Virgins and Victims.
Today we're going to be looking at the life of Artemisia Gentileschi. With an extraordinary name like that, you can imagine she's going to have an extraordinary career. She really was someone who was very, very successful in her time. In fact, one of the most successful artists in 17th century Italy. She was known particularly for her depiction of biblical subjects, particularly of women from the Old Testament. She was exceptional in many ways, particularly because she managed her own studio and managed to work on her own commissions. She had as patrons very, very important people from Europe, people such as Cosimo II, the Duke of Tuscany, Philip IV of Spain, even Charles I of England. However, you may not have heard of her. This is simply because her work fairly soon fell out of fashion, as did someone who had influenced her a great deal, such as Caravaggio. So towards the end of the 17th century, as you move into the 18th, there is much more a classical style which comes over with straight lines and not nearly as extravagant as the sort of Baroque Mannerist paintings of Artemisia. And her work is not exactly forgotten, but many of her canvases are either attributed to her father, Orazio, or attributed to other minor painters. And it's only really in the last probably 30, well, maybe 30 or 40 years that her name has begun to appear in art history courses. Now, in fact, at the moment, we're sort of experiencing sort of an Artemisia mania. There have been something like 3 novels printed about her in the last couple of years. And there have been a number of discoveries of her canvases, and many of her canvases, which were thought to belong to other minor artists, have now been reattributed to her. Why is this? Well, it seems that in many ways, the interest that we have now, in particularly in 2024, for women, the legacy that women have left, the struggle that women actually had to actually produce and sell their work, whether it's be in music, art, or writing, or in fact any of these fields, is something which is of great interest to us now. And it's the same reason, really, why people now are interested in Caravaggio. People are now interested in mental health. And again, of course, you get the great passionate following for Vincent van Gogh, who at the time was someone who was not considered as a great painter. What the other reason why she has now unfortunately become famous is the interest in women as victims. And of course, there is the great trial that took place during her lifetime, which I think she was about 18. She was raped by a painter who was a colleague of her father. And the rape trial was sort of a sensation of the time. There were pamphlets written about it. And in fact, there are even the transcript of the trial, so we know exactly what happened. And people now have begun to interpret many of her more violent pieces of work in the light of this trauma that she went through. In fact, she herself rises above this completely, never wants to be seen as a victim, wants to be seen as a successful painter on a par with any other painter, male or female, of the time. So today I want to really look at her life and try and see what it was that was so interesting in her work and strip away the new sort of prejudices which we have, such as seeing her simply as a woman who has been traumatized. So let us look then at her early life. Her father was Orazio Gentileschi, a successful painter of his time, probably not the most successful, but had his own studio. She was one of four, in fact, she was the eldest of his four children, the only girl, and her mother died when she was 12 years old. So she remains in her father's studio. And in many ways, this is very fortunate for her. He doesn't remarry. And so she becomes sort of the late woman of the house, I suppose, in many ways, but also is almost an apprentice to her father. Now, this, of course, would have been very difficult for any other woman had you not had a father or a close family member who was a painter. A woman could not sort of go out and become an apprentice and still sort of guard her sort of good reputation. So she will be very influenced by her father's style, will learn the trade, the nuts and bolts of the trade, how to mix paints and work with canvases and so on. But she will also grow up in the area around the Piazza del Popolo, which we were talking about in the first lecture, in the second lecture, I think it was. Remember with the Pope who was setting up Rome for the Jubilee and develops these long, straight streets which radiate out from Piazza del Popolo. Now, she will then, this is Piazza del Popolo, looking up the Corso. Now, this area around here was where all the artists gathered. There were many, many studios here. There were little shops that sold the paints that were to be mixed. And this would have been where Artemisia would have met all the other painters. Now, being very close to Piazza del Popolo, it meant that she would have seen the paintings of Caravaggio. Now, as I said before, a young girl who is a respectable young girl is not even supposed to be out seen on her balcony, certainly not out and about by herself. She would have to be accompanied by some sort of older woman or members of her family. But because she would frequent this church, it was very close to where she lived, and her mother was buried here, she would have gone inside and seen the chapel, the Carrassi chapel, with the works of Caravaggio. So as she moved around Rome, she would see the works of this great painter and other great painters, because as you know, the church was the great patron of painters of the time. Pieces went into private collections, but many, many pieces were in private chapels in these large churches. So in Santa Maria del Popolo, you have the two amazing works of Caravaggio, what made him famous. Remember, we were talking about the importance of light and shade and theatricality during the Baroque age, which corresponded entirely with the Counter-Reformation of the Church. The Church wishes to bring people back from the Lutheran doctrines to show that faith is happening now. It's not something that is happening necessarily in another world. And so what you have in these paintings are the borderline between us as an audience and the action which is taking place in the painting is blurred. We feel that St. Paul, or Saul as he was at the time, is going to fall out of the picture into our reality. So we can participate in this extraordinary experience. Now, the Baroque painters were not interested in people, sitting down and having breakfast. It was these extraordinary moments between life and death, or the moment when revelation of the spiritual nature of the world is revealed. And so what Caravaggio is trying to show here is, in the most sort of banal setting with this super real flanks of the horse, you still have this miraculous moment when Saul literally sees the light. And of course, this Caravaggio was famous for his treatment of the way light falls on figures. So Artemisia would have been influenced by this particular painting. And on the other side of the chapel, as you can see, you actually have Caravaggio's Crucifixion of St. Peter. And this is very similar. This is, again, a moment of intense spirituality, where Peter has asked to be crucified upside down. You see him as an old man, but about, already looking towards heaven, but he is taken. His experience is isolated in many ways from the extraordinary banality of people sort of hugging and tugging and trying to lift his weight up, and the backside of this fellow and the bare feet which are protruding into our place. So in other words, we can participate in this moment, even though we are sort of people at this time living in the 17th century. As you see, that the people who are costumed here, they're costumed as though they were at the same time as Caravaggio. So as Artemisia moves around the city, she will see a number of these remarkable paintings by Caravaggio. This one is in San Luigi dei Francesi, again, a moment of literally seeing the light. Christ on the right-hand side has come in the darkness. His finger is pointing, very much like Michelangelo's Adam, pointing towards Matthew, who is a tax player, counting his money. It's just a common tavern. The people there are just sitting in their normal clothes. The only person who is dressed maybe in the time of Christ is Christ himself. But as Christ points, the light comes across to St. Matthew, or who soon will be called. So again, many sort of spiritual messages. The cross above the window, the light or the shadow gradually becoming light. On the other side of the chapel, there is also something which is very important. This is the death of St. Matthew, and Artemisia will be very influenced by these large-scale murder scenes. So here you have St. Matthew on the ground. All the light is on the heathen who has come in just at the moment when St. Matthew is about to baptize someone, and the light is shaping his muscles as he kills St. Matthew. Now, the other paintings which Artemisia would not have seen but would have been talked about is the head of Goliath, which is this painting of David and Goliath by Caravaggio, where you have sort of, again, biblical scenes taken out of the Old Testament, which is what Artemisia will do in many ways. However, here we have a young man, was David, holding up the head of Goliath, whom he has slain, and it is supposed to be a portrait. The head of Goliath is supposed to be a portrait of Caravaggio. So she is in many ways very fortunate to be in the studio of her father and seeing this new type of art which is taking over. And this art will influence Orazio, her father. This is one of his paintings very early on, the Annunciation, which is a very delicate, rather traditional painting. But later, about 10 years later, when Orazio is influenced by the work of Caravaggio, you can see how it has changed. The figures now are monumental. It's no longer a scene that we see from a distance with vanishing points. We're actually right in the middle of the action. It's violent. It's the light and the dark are the most significant playing colours, apart from, I suppose, the bright colours as well. Now, Artemisia would have also been very much aware of the trial of Beatrice Cenci, who we were talking about last week. Remember, we were saying that at the public execution, painters in particular were given the front seats, and Orazio was supposed to always carry his young daughter around on his shoulders and was seen often with her. So it is quite possible that she would have, as a young girl, probably about 7, would have witnessed the execution of Beatrice. Caravaggio certainly would have, and it is thought that this execution would have possibly inspired one of the paintings that we're going to look at in a moment. Orazio also took advantage of the fact that he had a young girl in his studio, his daughter, to use her as his model and sometimes as a nude model. Now, at this time, most men, most artists, used male bodies and then transformed them into female bodies because it was not considered correct to be having nude women posing in your studio. Only prostitutes would do that, and they also demanded very, very high fees to do that. So he would have most possibly have taken advantage of the fact that he had young Artemisia, and she would have modelled maybe for him in some of his naked or semi-naked scenes. It's thought that this young girl playing a violin or is Artemisia herself, the sort of very sharp look, the auburn hair, and the close-up of her. It is probably her. Now, when she was 17, she was Orazio used to boast that his daughter was extraordinarily talented, and you can understand why he said this. This is painted by her when she's 17 years old. So it shows an extraordinary capacity to position figures, to align the gestures in a correct way, and it also underlines what she will become famous for, which is the ability to interpret the feelings of a female in the situations that she will paint. As I said before, many of these were major sort of turning points in the Old Testament where Hebrew heroines would carry out murders to save their fatherland or to save their family. But in this painting here, what is Susanna and the Elders? Well, Susanna was supposed to have been bathing when 2 of the elders come out and see her and lust after her. Now here you have the 2 of them leaning right into her space. She's turning away from them in a sort of horrified manner, and the man in red has got his finger up to his lips. Now this was to say hush, because if you cried out, and it could be proved that you'd cried out, rape or help, it would mean that you had been raped and that you weren't a willing victim. So he's trying to tell her, be quiet, because if you actually call out and we can't do as we wish with you, we will blacken your reputation anyhow. She, of course, turns to God, and God saves her. However, she will return many, many times to this image, I suppose, of a female who is being threatened by older men in a rather voyeuristic manner. Now, her father, Orazio, also depicts this, and you can really see the difference between the two of them. It tells the story, I suppose, with Susanna being surprised by two old men. They're looking even more lecherous than in the preceding painting, but it really just tells the story. It doesn't really give you the feeling of horror and shame and humiliation that even a girl as young as 17 was able to put into her painting. Now, when she's a little bit older, Orazio is working with another painter, Agostino Tassi, who has been brought, as were the Gentileschi, to Rome to work on papal commissions. This is a time when, as we saw, the Jubilee was taking place. There were many cardinals who were interested in art. They were building villas and palazzi and needed people to work on them for them. And Tassi works with Orazio, and in fact Orazio hopes that he will actually get some extra patronage from working with Tassi. Now, Pope Paul V was a Borghese. You would all, as you know, Rome, of course, know the Borghese Gardens, the Borghese Palace, and its extraordinary collection. Now, the Borghese Pope was in power, and the family was in power for a long time. So once a Pope came to power, he would set up his family with his cardinal nephews and so on, and huge amounts of money would be spent on taking over parts of Rome. Now, Tassi's specialty was a sort of simulated landscapes and ceilings, which we saw in the last lecture. You would remember in the Gesù and Sant Ignacio, the way in which the ceiling seems to completely disappear into heaven. Well, Agostino Tassi was very good with creating simulated gardens on walls, but even making these, the walls of a dining room look as though they recede into the distance. And one of his specialties also was sea scenes. Now, he was very much taken by Artemisia. Now, Artemisia, of course, had to put up with all sorts of scurrilous tales about her. Possibly some of the clients of Orazio had made passes at her, had been rebuffed. The apprentices also had been rebuffed, and so got their own back by telling stories about her, how she was a little tart and so on. And Tassi seemed to believe in some ways these stories, that she'd given herself to so many people, that everyone knew about, what a slut she was. Anyway, Orazio made the rather foolish move of asking Tassi to come into his studio to teach Artemisia perspective. And he did this on one occasion, shut her in her bedroom and raped her. Now, in the trial notes, she very cleverly defends herself by saying he put a handkerchief and a hand over my mouth so I couldn't cry out and cry out to the people outside that I was being raped. So she protects herself from not having made verbal noise because she was being gagged. The relationship, she is, of course, horrified by this. She doesn't tell her father immediately, but he finds out. Sort of gossip is told in the local taverns and in the places where he buys paint. And he is very taken aback when he approaches Tassie about the rape, and Artemisia evidently had agreed to other sort of sexual encounters with him, with the belief that he would marry her. When Orazio confronts Tassi, he finds out that Tassi actually already has a wife and has really no intention of marrying Artemisia. Now, the emphasis here was not on the humiliation and the trauma that Artemisia went through on a personal plane. It was the problem of the dishonour to the family. Her virginity was of use in the sense that she could be married off to potential patrons or other painters. Now, unfortunately for her, Agostino Tassi was an all-round rotter. He'd already been condemned to the papal boats to row, but had managed to talk his way out of it. He'd decided to get rid of his wife so that he could go carry on with the wife's 17-year-old sister, who already had one baby and was pregnant with another. He tried to have his wife murdered. In fact, he'd paid for this to happen. He was a thief. He was really not a very pleasant person. We know all about this because the archives show the testimony of Tassi, of Orazio, and of Artemisia herself. Now, to ascertain that one was telling the truth, do you remember we were talking about torture and this idea that you had to put the body under stress so that the soul could be free to tell its true story. So thumbscrews were the sort of things which were very, was considered mild torture. Artemisia wasn't even put in thumbscrews, but she had her fingers twisted, which would have been very painful and very upsetting for an artist, of course, but she continues to claim that he had abused her. Now, the church took this very seriously. The Catholic Church was at this time, at the time of the Counter-Reformation, was trying to reinforce the values of, matrimony and chastity and so on. So Artemisia was fortunate in the sense that the church took the trial to the highest point. Tassi was condemned to 2 years exile, but unfortunately, fortunately for him, he got away with it. So what you do with a girl who has been dishonoured, who's dishonoured the family, Orazio marries her off very quickly to a sort of a second great artist whose family he would have known from Florence. And so Artemisia sets out in 1613 to live with Pier Antonio in Florence. Now, she takes with her an unusual dowry. Orazio has given her a considerable dowry, which is to be paid in lapses. It's not to be taken all at once. And normally the husband had the right to touch the dowry, but in this particular scenario, the husband was only really allowed to touch the interest on this dowry. So this meant that Artemisia gets away from the scandal. She will get away from the domination of her father. She is her own woman in many ways because she actually has some kind of financial backing as well. Well, she goes to live with the family of her husband, who really are quite humble, but they are tailors, and this meant that they actually worked in materials, embroidery, and so on, and so possibly had some patronage from the Grand Dukes of Tuscany, but almost certainly from actors and people who worked at the Tuscan court. So it is via this sort of network of costumes that and artistry that she will gradually edge her way into the court of Cosimo II, Grand Duke of Tuscany. Now, she is at this time is working on the first of at least two canvases, where she depicts the killing of the general Holofernes by Judith. Judith is a Hebrew heroine who goes into the tent of Holofernes, sends him to sleep with wine, or maybe something else, and while he is asleep, she cuts his head off. Now, what we have here is a very different version from versions which had already been painted. You have a very muscular woman actually sort of stabbing and cutting, and the blood is spurting towards the spectator. Now, if you remember what we looked at with Caravaggio, with Saul falling down almost into the picture plane, into the lap of the spectator, here you have the impression that Holofernes is going to fall, his head is going to fall into us, and that the blood is going to drip onto us as well. You also have his last movement. He's pushing his hand up, and she is aided and abetted by another woman who is holding him down so he can't struggle. So these are dangerous women. These are women who kill. And this is not usually depicted in such a heroic way. Now, if you actually look at the painting by Caravaggio of Judith and Holofernes, you see, graphic blood spurting, but there is a sense that there's no physicality in it. You have Judith seems to be this rather prim young lady frowning. From the angle that she's at, she wouldn't have very much leverage to cut through his throat and his neck, and there's nothing really that's keeping him down. The old crone on the sides looking rather annoyed, she's really just holding the bag. So there's a sort of rather passive side to the painting, with the sort of horror in the centre, with the red curtain and then the red blood, but nothing like the concentration and absolute decision to kill that you had in the painting of Artemisia. Now, these women who kill are seen as they're enacting out the will of God. They're not seen as just murderers. This was what had to be, and the sword would be considered the sword of justice. Later on, she will return to the same scene, and this time it will be even more realistic. This time you have Judith, who is actually not just cutting horizontally, but leaning absolutely into the task, hauling his head back, his mouth is open, the blood is spurting up in a kind of parallelogram. It's splurting up onto her dress as well. She would have been influenced by Galileo's work on curves. The knife is going right through his neck. The maid is looking even more forceful, and also we have much more beautiful pieces of material. And in invoices that can be found in Florence, you found that Artemisia had bought the red piece of velvet, the blue silk, and the taffeta, the golden taffeta. She very much identifies in many ways with this Judith, who at the same time is almost like an Amazon, where you can see one breast and the other breast is flat. But also, if you hone in on the detail of her bracelet, you will see that it has Artemis on it. Artemis, of course, who's her namesake. Here you have the blood, as you can see, spurting over it. Again, people have interpreted this violent scene as being, revenge for her rape. It is much more taking elements of the Old Testament and depicting them very realistically. One of my favourite paintings by Artemisia is Judith with the head of Holofernes, and this is what she has managed to capture here is the moment after the decapitation. They have the head in the basket. They're looking out of the tent to see if anyone has heard the shrieks of the victim or if they can go out. She is ready with the sword of justice again. She's a dangerous woman. She is prepared to kill again for her people. And there is a sense of solidarity between the queen, who she is, and the maid. As you can see, she has her hand on the maid's shoulder. So these two are sort of united in this murder and united as women who are going to escape with it. Now, later on, when she will depict this, this is Orazio. This is her father's version of the same scene. It's not that they copied each other. These often were commissions, which were very popular at the time. And I think you can see how less psychologically convincing this particular painting is. You have Judith in red, alert, looking out, seeing if anyone's coming. You have the maid looking the other way. But there just isn't the same sort of tension, alertness, togetherness in many ways, even though they're touching, that you had with the two painted by Artemisia. And the fact that she's sitting down doesn't really help either. So later on, Artemisia will paint Judith and her maid. Now, this, of course, is very, very much in the style of Caravaggio, where the scene is illuminated simply by a flickering flame, which flickers onto the hand, and the hand which holds the sword, which has done its duty and which can be used again, the sword of justice. This idea of really basically everything could go wrong in a minute. You have this sort of feeling that of tension and the impression that you are actually living this extraordinary moment. The maid is staring exactly in the same direction, very, very different from the way Orazio had them looking in different directions. And later on, when she will come back to Naples, her palette will have darkened. She will paint the same thing again, possibly, I think, not quite so convincingly, but again using the flickering flame with the light and the dark, the shadow on the white, and then on the pale brown of her skirt, and then simply outlining the breast and the face of the servant. So again, what Artemisia has managed to put into these paintings is something that possibly a man couldn't, which is this the feeling of trepidation that women feel in these situations, the feeling of solidarity that women would also feel when they're almost going to be caught out and most certainly going to pay for it with their lives. Well, and so while she's in uh, Florence, she will not just simply be painting, but will also be having a very busy family life. She gives birth to what is maybe 4 or maybe 5 children. There's not very much detail about this, but the first 2 children um, die very young. A second boy will live long enough to go back to Rome, but will die in Rome. The fourth will, Prudencia, named after her dead mother, will live with her for the rest of her life, and she will provide a very good dowry for her. Now, uh, but can you imagine having 4 or 5 children within 5 years, as well as managing your own workshop and producing paintings and trying to attract patrons? Now, her husband wasn't very successful as a painter, and he wasn't very successful as a businessman either. And it was really up to her to basically do everything. But here you have some images of a mother and a child, which was painted during this time, and I think you very much get the feeling of what it is like to hold a child and to stare into its eyes. I think this is a very important aspect that she has given us. Now, while she's going through pregnancies and childbirth, she also manages, through these connections that I've been talking about, through the tailors and the sort of connections with actors and then via singers, she actually begins to enter the court of Cosimo, and evidently even performs in either singing or playing the lute, or acting or dancing in some form. There's a reference to Artemisia. And she then manages to produce herself in self-portraits. Now, it was important that she use self-portraits because she wants to advertise herself as well as just selling the portrait. It's a way of getting her image out there, but of course also it means that you don't have to pay for someone to come and sit for you. You don't have the fact that they mightn't turn up or something like that. So this is thought to be herself as a lute player. The other thing that I hadn't mentioned was that while she was being schooled very much as an artist in the studio of her father, she was illiterate and certainly didn't have time to play a musical instrument. And so when she gets to Florence, on top of everything else she is doing, she manages to learn an instrument and learns to read and write, and will, by the end of her career, become someone who writes poetry, who is accepted into literary circles. In fact, the only woman who is, and actually writes sort of sonnets with the Barini Pope. So someone who learns very quickly and is also a very canny businesswoman. So she's seen here. The turban usually means that you're an artist, but it is thought that maybe she is actually representing herself as a gypsy, that she would have perhaps played in this court scene that she participated in. Now, she uses the same format for a religious portrait. As you can see, it's virtually traced exactly the same position. She is now St. Catherine of Alexandria, of course, who was one of the doctors of the church, but who was put on the wheel, and the angel came in and broke the wheel. That's why her symbol is the Catherine wheel. She has the symbol of martyrdom with the palm, and the symbol of being a queen as well. She has managed to veil her breasts a little bit, only a little bit, but it's not nearly as revealing as in the portrait that we have just seen. So by now, people are actually asking for portraits of her. Now she is given the commission by the court of Tuscany, of Cosimo, to paint Mary Magdalene. Now, Mary Magdalene, or Maria Magdalena, was the wife of Cosimo II. And Cosimo II was very aware that he was extremely ill and that he wasn't going to live for very long. And he had decided to appoint his wife, Maria Magdalena, and his mother as joint regents until his only son was old enough to take over as the next duke. He didn't want to put his brother in as regent because his brother could then have actually installed his own son, and the dukedom would be lost to the duke's side of the family. So here we have then Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is, the sinner who washes the feet of Christ. Here, of course, she's seen dressed in lavish court dress. This is because this is dedicated to Maria Magdalena of Tuscany, who doesn't want to have a portrait of herself dressed in rags. So here you have this beautiful taffeta. The sort of references that she's sort of pulling off her beautiful dress because she's about to become a penitent. If you can see under her hand, there is a mirror which she is pushing away, vanitas, looking at oneself. She's about to repent and become a mystic. So this is a very sort of interesting, non-conforming portrait of Mary Magdalene, and again showing the business savvy of Artemisia. This was Maria Magdalena of Austria, who was the regent. Now, at this time, Artemisia also manages to become or get the patronage of Michelangelo Buonarroti, the nephew, the grandnephew of Michelangelo, who was setting up a palace in honor of his great relative. And he commissions the great artists of Florence at the time and asks Artemisia to paint this part of the ceiling, which is inspiration here. Inclination, the allegory of inclination. Now, Artemisia, to some degree, this is a self-portrait, but she is very daring. She actually paints a completely nude woman. It's only later on, 50 or 60 years later, that people look up and are shocked. They're sort of looking at the nether regions of a naked woman, and they decide to put a bit of skirt over her buttocks. So quite a daring piece of work, but advertising that she is really ready to push the boundaries in her style. At this time, she is honoured to be welcomed into the Academy of the Art of Design, which where the people met in the Santissima Annunziata. And this was a group of very important people, amongst whom was Galileo. She knew Galileo and would write letters to him and would stick by him through thick and thin. So she is moving in extremely high circles when she is in Florence, and she's really only in her 20s. So she was someone who is talented, extraordinary dedication, determination, imagination, and always looking a bit outside the box. This is Galileo. Well, her husband is not someone who can be relied upon in any way, I would say. And she falls into financial difficulties and decides that to get even greater patronage, she needs to come back to Rome. She's already now recognised as a successful painter and wishes to push this further, and of course where further than at the papal court. So she and her family, and this would be the little boy and the daughter Prudencia, and the husband who will move back to Rome, very much in the same area as where she had lived as a child. Now, by now, the Barberini family have taken over the papal throne. You have a number of Barberini cardinals, all of whom are extremely cultured and cultivated, and will set their area up around the Metro Barberini, or the Palazzo Barberini, with their symbol of the bee. Pope Urban VIII is a man who is very interested in women as intellectuals. He writes, Greek and Roman sonnets and exchanges these with Artemisia. They'll be in power for quite some time, and this will be of great use to Artemisia. It's also at this time that she finds another great patron, and this is Cassiano del Pozzo, who will not be a lover, but someone who will be a great patron. We have letters that she's written to him saying, look, can I have some more money? I need to flatter some women to get me to get portraits done by them. Can you send me money for 5 pairs of gloves and so on? And he will recommend her to many of his friends who are the great patrons of the time. It is during this time that she will paint the Magdalene in ecstasy. Now, this is, of course, a very different Magdalene from the one that we saw painted for Maria Magdalena, the regent of Tuscany. We now have the Magdalene sort of still temptingly partially undressed. She's the tunic, it's no longer a beautiful piece of silk, is slipping from her shoulders, but she is completely self-contained. Her body is being pulled together by her clasped fingers and hands. Her neck is back, her mouth is shut, her eyes are shut. She's concentrating completely on the sort of inner sensations, even though she is looking rather sort of erotic at the same time with these beautiful, chestnut curls, reddish curls flowing over her, the sort of sinuous folds of her clothing and the naked shoulder. So it's a very it's an interesting painting where there's a slightly erotic element to a spiritual theme, which of course she would have seen also with Bernini's The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. She also paints the penitent Magdalene again, about to divest herself of her clothes, touching her hair, the hair with which she will wash Jesus' feet. Now, her father, of course, does the same themes. This is Orazio, her father's Magdalene in her cave, because of course the Magdalene eventually goes to the south of France and lives the rest of her life in her cave with nothing but a sackcloth and her hair covering her. Very different from the Magdalenes that we've seen so far, and rather different from this one that we have here as well. But here you really have the impression of a nude who's posed. There isn't any of that sort of sense of interiority or physicality or the giving up of the corporal self to an inner vision. You really just have the feeling that this is quite an attractive girl on the beach. We have one of these portraits that Artemisia would have been asking money for the gloves for. We don't actually know who it is, but she was very sort of skilled in flattering and emphasis on the clothes as well, because the clothing showed one's rank, one's wealth, and one's taste. So it was equally as important as the face of the sitter. It's during this time that she goes back to, again, these biblical scenes of heroines who risk their lives for the Jews. This one is Jael, who the story was, I think, Sisera was one of the generals of the Canaanites. The fighting had come to a halt. Jael was staying in a tent. The Jewish woman was staying in a tent outside the Jewish encampment, and it's not sure that the Jews are going to win. So Sisera, who is not in a good way, comes and asks for some milk and something to drink at her tent. And she welcomes him in, and a bit like the Holofernes, what does she do? Well, we're not sure, but we've got a fairly good idea. He's got his hand right up her dress. Anyway, he falls asleep, and while he's asleep, she gets a tent peg here and lifts the hammer and hammers it into his skull. So again, these aren't sort of women who just sort of give you some tranquilizers or something like that. These are really violent deaths, but at least in this one, it's the moment before that hammer hits the nail and the blood is going to gush, but it hasn't. So you feel rather sorry for the poor fellow. His stockings are halfway down and he looks a bit cold and miserable. But up here you actually have Artemisia's name here. So she's very much identifying. In fact, this could almost be a self-portrait, with this beautiful hairdo and the reddish auburn hair. It could be, again, her officiating at this murder. Another one of these murders, of course, Samson and Delilah, again, a woman out, outsmarting a very clever, heavy man. Here she has a maidservant helping her, where she cuts the hair of Samson, and of course he loses all his strength, so therefore he's gone to sleep, and that'll be the end of him. A little bit frightening at the time. These are really rather castrating women. You also have other women, not just from the Old Testament or from the Apocrypha that she uses as subjects, but also great subjects from Greek and Roman history. Lucretia was the best example of this. She was raped by one of the king's sons and kills herself rather than bring dishonour on her family, even though it hadn't been her fault. And as a result of this, the kings are banished forever from Rome, and it will be the beginning of the Republic. So again, a death at a moment, crucial moment of political importance, and a woman actually bringing this about. She goes back time and time again to the subject of Susanna and the elders. Susanna here is looking more defensive. Again, the two of the old men are on top of each other, saying, "We'll get you one way or another. Make sure you don't say anything." Here she's looking very distressed, covering herself over. Again, very much sort of painted by a woman who knows what it's like to be sort of leered at by men. Now, it's during this time that she's in Rome that it's quite possible that she enters a relationship with the Duke of Alcala, who was one of the grandees of Spain, and it is some sort of biographers of Artemisia think that she actually has a daughter by him. It Some people think she has, and some people think she hasn't. There's reference to another daughter who is born, who is eventually married off to one of the grandees of Naples. This couldn't have happened unless she had a noble father, and so on. However, there's no proof that it was necessarily the Duke of Alcala. However, during this time, she and another person of importance will go to Venice, and she will go to Venice at the time that Alcala goes, but also the time of Nicholas Lantier. Now, Lanier was a courtier, a lute player, a musician at the court of Charles I in London, and he had been sent by Charles to buy the collection of the Duke of Mantua. Now, it is certain that Nicholas Lanier was one of the lovers of Artemisia. Now, Artemisia lived the life of a man in many ways. I mean, she ran her own business. She had powerful protectors, from the Pope all the way down to the courts of Europe. But she also chose lovers. Many men passed through her rooms. And there are even documents that show that while she was living in Rome, she had her main studio at one place, but it also had a little sort of bachelor flat not far away that she also paid for. It just was sort of a bedroom and a kitchen and so on. So what she was using that for, one can only imagine. But Nicolas Lanier works with Artemisia to secure the Duke of Mantua's collection, which was an extraordinary collection with Mantegna, Rubens, Titian, Van Dyck's, and so on, because Charles of England was a great collector. Lanier goes back to London, but it is quite possible that it will be one of the reasons why Artemisia will eventually go to London. She goes down to Naples now in 1630, and this is at the same time that grandee, the Spanish Alcala, goes to Naples. Naples, of course, was part of the Spanish kingdom at the time. She makes her way very well when she is in Naples. It wasn't easy to penetrate the artistic community there. Even great painters such as Reni, for example, was chased out of Naples by Riviere and local painters who didn't want them to be getting the commissions that they thought were their own. However, one way or another, Artemisia does very well. She has a number of private commissions, but also manages to have her first church commissions. And this was very important because what she had been painting up until now would only be seen in private collections. So once you had your paintings up in the chapels of a church, it meant that everyone could see your work, and it also meant that you had the patronage of the Catholic Church. So this is her Annunciation. Now, she has moved to smaller figures. This is now, the New Testament, so we don't have these murderous scenes that we've had before. Usually you have someone who is holy. Here, the angel should have been bigger and higher up than Mary, who at the moment is still just a young girl. She actually is not yet the mother of Christ. That's sort of coming in a minute as you see the dove whizzing down towards her ear. But she is taller and a more important figure than the angel, even though the angel takes up this space here and he has his hand higher. So this time a woman's seen in a very sort of submissive position, rather different from those heroines that we've been noting. Philip IV of Spain also gives her a commission for the birth of St. John the Baptist. And again, Artemisia excels at the portrayal of women and of the importance of women, the way women recognize a sign or something that other people don't recognize. And even though these women are very humble. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you have 4 maids or midwives who are looking after the baby. We have reference to the fact that this is John the Baptist who will baptize Christ. So therefore you have the 2 basins. He will be baptized and he'll baptize Christ. The line comes down on the sturdy arm of the maidservant. They're talking to each other. They have recognized there is something special about this child. And this woman here who has the napkin rolled up, it could be the scroll, talking about the importance of John the Baptist. And the real birth of which we have over here with Elizabeth and Zachariah over here, they're very much in the darkness. I mean, they've brought about the birth of this child who takes up all the light. But it's these protagonists here with the white and the light that are really showing us the importance of women and their knowledge. This is another very interesting painting which was done during the time she was in Naples. It's Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Now, the story is that Jesus goes out to a well and there finds a woman drawing water. And he tells her that, she's a fornicator, that she's a common person, and so on. But, you can rise above this if you listen to my story and help proselytize the world. So normally you'd have Christ much bigger than the woman. But what we have here is a conversation which is going on. Normally you would have Christ sort of looking askance and the woman looking humbled, rather sort of, a bit like Mary Magdalene recognizing her fault. Whereas here, Jesus is reaching out, trying to make a point, not mansplaining, but, very much sort of trying to convince her, not just sort of the impression of, listen to what I'm saying, I'm right. He's making a real effort. And she's not cringing at all. She's leaning forward, listening to what he has to say. And the pose of the forearm up to the head like that is the pose of a philosopher or of a learned person. Actually, look in Raphael's paintings and even Michelangelo's paintings as well. So she's seen as someone who has her own dignity, who is able to make up her own mind. And of course, the idea is that she will become as living water. The water in the well, it just symbolizes the fact that she will then go out like the apostles who are behind Jesus over here. go out and teach the message of Christianity. I think it is quite a sensitive, interesting portrayal of interaction. Now, we now go to London in 1638, and evidently she has become someone who is known not just as a painter, known to the popes and to the different courts of Europe, but also someone who can be used politically. And it is thought that one of the Barberini cardinals had approached her to go to London to reinforce the court of Henrietta Maria. Now, King Charles I of England was, of course, a Church of England, but he had married the French princess. And this portrait here by Van Dyck is showing the laurel wreath and the palm of the olive palm, the idea that the two between them could bring about the sort of reconciliation between the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church. This wasn't happening. In fact, Queen Henrietta was very isolated, and it was at a time when King Charles's one of his ministers was wishing to step up antagonism towards the Catholics. So it's thought that Artemisia, might have been sent over to reinforce the court of Henrietta Maria, as indeed Rubens had been sent over as well. Rubens had been there painting the ceilings, and Orazio, the father of Artemisia, was also there. So Artemisia comes over and is reunited with her father, whom she has not seen for a number of years. And it is thought that while she is there, she paints the ceilings of what is now Marlborough House. And it's thought that this is Esther before Xerxes or Ahasuerus. Some art critics have thought that this was painted during the time she was in Venice, based on ideas that the fainting Esther was more like a Giorgione creature. However, there has been quite a cogent analysis of this painting put forward, that what is happening here is supposed to relate to what is happening at the court of Charles. So the story here is Esther has not told her Syrian husband that she is Jewish, but one of his ministers is about to start what's the word, castigating, coming down hard on the Jews, and she feels that she has to go and plead with him. And the problem was that you were not supposed to be into the presence of the ruler, or even if he's your husband, on pain of death. But she decides that it is her duty to confess that she is Jewish and to plead for her people. And this is the moment when he agrees that he will listen to her and maybe modify his state policies. And she is swooning here with the tension which has been generated by this scene. So the idea is that basically it's the same thing as Queen Henrietta would be begging King Charles to pull back on the antagonism that there was towards the Roman Catholic Church. So really a kind of a political allegory, if you wish to put it that way. Orazio, when he's there, actually does this birth of Noah which is very different, as you can see. Arms in all directions. Is it over there? Is it over here? Rather sort of stately, painterly execution of finding a baby in a cradle. You get the idea of the scene, but really no idea of the excitement or interest of the time. The women are, of course, all dressed in costumes of the court of Charles. After having worked there, having seen her father dies while she's there, and it would have been very difficult for her to actually even get to England, to get a passport and then travel by boat and then we weren't trains, but by coach and so on. Very difficult. And then to go back from a Protestant country back to a Catholic country again. It shows that she was an intrepid traveller, apart from anything else. So she comes back to Naples in 1640. Here is again more portraits of herself as a painter. She's using very much the kind of palette which was popular in Naples at the time. Again, comes back to these biblical scenes. David now seeing Bathsheba, who is bathing. He sends her husband off to be killed in battle so that he can marry her himself. Again, more painterly style. It doesn't have any of the emotive strength that some of the earlier paintings of Susanna and the Elders has. However, she comes back again to something that she continues to come back to, and this is Susanna and the Elders in 1650. Here, Susanna is now more active, all right? You now have the old man is still saying shush. This time she's not just turning away, she's turning over, but she's pushing him away. So there's much more agency in it. Stay away from me, but get away, pushing away, which I think is quite interesting in comparison to what we have here, where she is cowering, completely, not knowing what to do in the face of these two old men. The last painting that we have of Susanna of the Elders, in fact, the last painting that we probably have of her, is Susanna now turning around, facing them, putting her hand up. She's pulled the clothes over her, and she is basically saying, go away, and confronting them, which I think is, in fact, this fellow here is looking not quite sure what to do, even though his friend is still leaning forward and saying, be quiet. She is actually taking part as an agent in the scene. Now, that was probably the last painting that was executed by Artemisia. The plague came and wiped out something like about a third, if not more, of Naples, and it is not really even known where she is buried. It's thought that she was buried in the church of the Florentines, but when that was excavated, in fact, part of it was ruined. Some of the graves were put elsewhere. When they dug up the graves, they found nothing in them. There is no trace of her at all. So for someone who dominated the scene in her own way, it's sort of a very mysterious ending. Her daughter, Prudencia, became an artist, but not a particularly successful one, certainly not like her mother. There seemed to be this other daughter whom she mentions having to get a dowry for, but we know neither her name nor who she married. But the last painting that we have, and which really I started out this series with, is her self-portrait as the Muse of Painting. Now, the Muse of Painting was always shown with dark hair, with straight black eyebrows and a medallion hanging over her breast with a mask on it. And the Muse of Painting also usually had something over her mouth. In other words, she didn't need to speak because she was producing visual objects. Artemisia paints herself as the Muse of Painting, right? And only a woman can do this, be both the Muse of Painting and herself. It's not really thought how she can do this, whether she actually had several mirrors set up so that she could see herself from this angle, but you have not just a woman who is holding onto a palette as a symbol of being artist, but has the same physicality that those heroines of hers had in the Bible. Here she's leaning forward with quite a meaty arm, really in the act of creating. But at the same time, someone who has great class in the sense of the beautiful clothes she's wearing, and as I have admitted saying, she was supposed to have been very beautiful as well. So I think this painting encapsulates everything that we've talked about with Artemisia, her skill at self-promotion, her skill as an artist, and her success as well. So this then is the end of these 3 lectures. As Napoleon said, history is a set of lies agreed upon. What was the truth about Beatrice Cenci? What really happened to Artemisia? What do we know about her? What really happens to the Vestal Virgins? It's all a matter of myth and legend. But I hope you have been as fascinated as I have by delving into the stories of these extraordinary women. Thank you.